Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Institute of Directors London Region on topic, on message event, an interview with Charlotte Croswell, CEO Innovate Finance, and Rhydian Lewis, OBE founder at RateSetter. So the numbers are coming in here. I hope you've all had a splendid day. I'm sure for many of you, like ourselves, it's not over yet. It's Monday, of course. That leaves at least another 4 days to make a difference here on planet Earth, and as we say in the IoD, to help make business happen. My name's David Stringer Lamar. I'm the managing director of a company called Fortis Consulting London, and I have the honour of being the chair of the Institute of Directors London Region. And I'm personally very excited and interested to hear about this debate at the moment, all about where we're going with FinTech. Let's see what's going on. But before we get over there, I'd like to hand over to my excellent colleague, Sophia, to talk to us about how you can engage with us today. Sophia.
Thanks very much, David. Well, welcome. And I'd just like to draw your attention to the bottom of your Zoom screen to two functions, the chat function and the Q function. In the chat function, we would love to hear where you are dialing in from. We can see that some of you are already doing so. We will also be posting a special LinkedIn post so that you can connect with other attendees from tonight's webinar. The Q&A section, please start posting your questions now. Alistair will try and get through as many as he can with Charlotte and Rhydian this evening. Please keep them short and succinct. And please also note that there is a like function, so you can upvote any questions that you really wish to see answered by Charlotte and Rhydian. Please also note that this webinar will be recorded. Thank you, and back over to you, David.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Here you'll see the agenda. After our introduction, to get straight into the hard-hitting interview, and then questions and answers. So as Sophia says, get them coming in and upvoting them. You've heard about the chat function there. Tell us about yourself. What's your name? What's your company? And obviously we'll try and get some connecting going here as well to help the economy move forward. Now, in terms of where we are today, the Institute of Directors, let's push us over onto the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. So we'll look at the business extra slide, but on the way through there. So the Institute of Directors, founded way back in 1903, Royal Charter 1906. In terms of the structures, the national IoD, then there's the regions, a London region, top performing area here in the IoD. We have two branches in London, Central London branch, and here, of course, the City of London branch, which has a number of specialities and interests. And one of those, of course, is financial services. And one that runs across, as it were, is, of course, technology as well. So sticking the two together, it's excellent that the City of London branch is running this discussion around FinTech. Also very much interested in innovation and international trade. Certainly some of the conversations we're having at the moment is all about this competitive landscape that we find ourselves in, and no doubt it's going to heat up as COVID-19 hopefully withdraws behind us. So one of the questions is where are we with FinTech at the moment? Are we ahead? Are we behind? Where on earth are we? I'm sure we'll be hearing about that. And as we lead up to this thing known as Brexit on the 1st of January, are we prepared for it? Is it going to impact FinTech, etc.? No doubt these are some of the questions we'll be looking at today. Business extra, so when the doors closed of the IoD, first time around indeed, we moved into the virtual sessions. Those were branded as business as unusual. We kind of now, unfortunately, had to get used to business as unusual, whatever the new norm is. So now they're being rebranded business extra. And this really is a great way of engaging and actually reaching out to many more people than we did before. And it's really a powerhouse way of engaging with lots of different people. And as ever, as personified by our two experts tonight, authoritative, influential, and insightful. So I'm sure you're going to have an excellent time here. And as I say, let us know who you are, what your company does, look at engaging. And tonight, of course, we're going to have the hard-hitting interview himself, Alistair King, Chair of IoD, City of London, a senior lawmaker, of course, in the City of London as an alderman, and also IoD national spokesperson for financial services. Alistair, over to you.
David, thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you all this evening. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to what I think will be a really remarkable evening talking about fintech. I've got two extremely impressive guests tonight. I've got Charlotte Croswell, who's CEO of Innovate Finance, which is the UK's sort of a representative body for fintech. And we've got one of the leading practitioners in the field. We've got Rhydian Lewis, OBE, who's the founder and CEO of RateSetter. They're both good friends of IoD, and who've done a fair number of things with us before. And it's lovely to have them here once again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say hello to Charlotte first. Charlotte, hello, are you there?
I am. Hi there, Alistair. How are you?
Excellent. Great to see you here. Thanks very much indeed for joining tonight. Rhydian, are you there? Oh, Rhydian, you'll just have to unmute yourself.
I am here.
Wonderful. Thanks very much indeed. Great to see you both. Now, Charlotte, if I could start first, rather than me introducing you, but you would do a much better job than me. So please, could you say a little bit about yourself, perhaps where you started, how you got to where you are now, and what other roles you perform?
Great, thanks, Alistair. Well, I keep, I hate being called a veteran, so I'm not going to say I'm a veteran of financial services because I think that makes me sound ancient. But I did start in the city 25 years ago, actually on the Goldman Sachs trading floor, but quickly moved out actually after a couple of years. I spent a long time at London Stock Exchange. And so that was during the tech boom. So all those tech IPOs that you'll remember from 99, 2000, I was involved in that, and we launched a tech index. I actually then moved to NASDAQ for 10 years, again, looking at listings and then secondaries, doing 2 startups for them. So I was across the derivatives, equities, clearing space. I was on the board of London Clearing House as well. And then a few years ago, I decided that actually I wanted to just go and spend a bit more time looking at the new technologies. Obviously, career of finance, always involved in technology. So I guess it was always pretty natural I was going to end up in fintech. And although I was only due to join the board of Innovate Finance as a non-exec director, I decided to go portfolio. I did agree to do 6 months interim CEO. So that was in August 2017. So that portfolio career has gone well, but joined permanently a year later, simply because just such a fascinating space to be in, so much to do, obviously. And just you look at the incredible innovation that's coming through financial services and changing the way we work and live. Just an amazing opportunity. And every day I get to find out new things. I'm still learning. I did learn to type on a manual typewriter, so I like to put that out there. But now I like to think about, you can ask me about technology, but just maybe don't ask me to fix it.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. We'll bear that in mind. Thank you. Rhydian, could I ask you the same idea? Where did you start? How did you get to where you are now? And say a little bit perhaps about the starting and the setting up of RateSetter.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first experience of the city was a JP Morgan on their sort of bond trading desk. And it was there that I met 2 people that went on to set up Betfair. You remember that in 2000 was the kind of cutting edge of kind of UK.com business. I mean, it happened to be applied to betting, but they just saw it as a sort of tech platform and a disintermediation of an old industry. So I actually went to work after university with them at Betfair for what turned out to be about 9 to 12 months, about 9 months. And I mentioned that purely because that was my first experience of a job, and I saw a business scaling very at amazing rates and taking on an old industry and looking to change it, and with all the resistance and political lobbying that came against them and all that kind of thing. So it was a very interesting experience as a young person to see that. But then I decided I somewhat missed a wave of that early stage business. And so I actually went into the city, into a graduate scheme at Lazard. Slightly different atmosphere, but an amazing training ground because they invest in their young people and they teach you about the law, about accounting, about corporate governance, about M&A, everything. And it's just a fantastic learning ground, and you get a lot of responsibility as a young person. You learn a lot. So I was there working, long hours, etc. And you start as a generalist, but over time, you kind of, after 2 or 3 years, you pick a sector. I picked financial services because I I just was appealed to the sort of, I suppose, the numerical side, but the complex side of financial services. So I was there for just shy of 7 years, and that spanned the financial crisis, so 2007 to 2009 when that occurred. And actually, I was, funny enough, I wasn't actually in Lazard London at the time. I was actually in Lazard Middle East, because I'd gone to help them set up an office in the Middle East, where, which was fascinating because it taught one to actually go out and grow a business without anything behind one, as opposed to just sitting in an office where, you know, business walked in through the door. But also, as it happened in 2008, when the Western banks were falling apart, it was the Middle East that a lot of people came to try and get the capital to prop up the banks, as we know. So actually, I was in a very interesting seat at the time, with a bit of financial services experience, but also a little bit of experience of investing in banks and things. So then I came back to London in 2009, and it was, you know, as everyone knows, the tail end of the financial crisis. And the experience of being at Betfair, where I thought, which is peer-to-peer betting, and seeing that sort of technology approach to things, and effectively rewriting a business model that existed a long time, that combined with my understanding I gained in banking and insurance and asset management, and combined with the banking crisis, I just thought this is the time to set up a business I've been thinking about in my mind for many years, which went on to be called RateSetter, which was, and then sort of fell into the peer-to-peer lending bucket. But it's at its most basic, what it was trying to do was, rather than change the relationship between a deposit, putting your money with a bank and the bank lending it on, it just simply matched investors and borrowers. And all sorts of things were put in place to make that safe and reliable, or safe as it needed to be. Obviously that grew very quickly because, and we're in a different phase now. I mean, I think the sort of psychosis of the financial crisis is now given away to a completely different psychology, which is interesting, because I think really is old news, the financial crisis. But when we set up RateSetter, it was big news, and there was a complete lack of desire to do a certain risk of lending, and that's where businesses like RateSetter were able to start doing some good lending, actually, because there was less demand from the banks, not just on the consumer side at RateSetter, but also on the small business side with businesses like Funding Circle. And they were able to do sensible lending, funded as it was at the time purely by people just putting money into a portfolio of loans. And over time, that's become more, which is a real endorsement of it, it's become more institutional, because institutional lenders, banks, they want to have access to that lending origination capability. Excellent. And that's where we are today, 10 years on, now part of Metro Bank, which, just while we'll cover it right up front, is just, we've got good lending capability, good technology, good credit management, and they've got obviously a very strong deposit base, and they want to grow in the areas where we're strong in lending. So it's a very natural pairing sort of growth.
I'm going to come to the Metro Bank deal sort of later on, but whilst we're just talking with you, the idea of just give us a view, just a 1 minute view on where you see the British economy is, or UK economy is at the moment. You know, are you bullish about it, or what's your thought?
I am quite bullish on it, and but in a funny kind of way, it has to be tempered by some feeling that is going to be a, you know, I've heard some naff phrases recently, but the K-shaped recovery, I think, is the one that hits home hardest, because it does seem like there's already massive, dramatic winners and losers out of this, and you can only see that being exacerbated. And I think you can see, and I think the fly in the ointment, if you like, is the political and social ramifications of clearing up the mess that's been caused this year. And so I think that needs careful handling, because you're going to have so much liquidity has been thrown at the economy and propped it up to the point whereby consumer loan books, SME loan books, which is a great view on the economy, have held up very well, really well. This is the crisis, the credit crisis that didn't happen so far. And you can see that depending on where that gets put, whether that just sits on the UK government balance sheet for the next 30 years and gets paid through by taxes, if that's the case, then you can see that this wasn't a crisis in some regard, and you can see consumers' spending power is going to is actually in great shape. I mean, we know that deposit balances have shot up since March. So you can build a very strong case for quite a rapid recovery, but it all depends on who's going to pay the cost of the economic output loss in the last 9 months or for the period. And if that's the government, then, and you could see it, the recovery could take hold. If it is actually eventually put onto consumers and small businesses, then it'll be catastrophic, I imagine. But if it's put on the government balance sheet and paid off over the next 30 years, you can see animal spirits come back pretty quickly. And I mean, this all presupposes a vaccine, obviously, and people feeling confident. But consumer spending, consumers have a lot of spending power going into 21, actually, as it currently stands.
Charlotte, could I ask the same question to you? How are you feeling? What's your feeling about the UK economy at the moment?
I mean, it's obviously too early to tell because we just don't know how long the impact's going to have. And then everything else that's going on in the macro environment as well. I note comments from the governor today on potential impact of trade deals on Brexit, and whether those come through and what comes through to replace them or to add in addition to them. So for me, when I look at the drive forward, and I'm obviously going to look at this with a technology lens, but the drive for digitization and how many businesses are starting, responding, driving through that digitization, we have to ensure that we have the funding available for them to make them grow, and to support them through all their issues. We also have to ensure that SMEs who either want to refinance or want to start, perhaps moving the businesses out of city centres into suburbs, you can actually go and get the SME lending to ensure that we can have that economic recovery. So there's no doubt we're going to see spending shift. If I look at the acceleration of digitization through the last few months, I mean, just incredible. My favorite statistic to use is it's estimated 6 million people downloaded a banking app for the first time during the crisis. That's 12% of working adults in the UK. So if we think about that, are we going to see a shift of spending, and are we going to be able to finance those new businesses to come through? And that's not just fintech, that's green, it's ESG. The drive obviously from the government to look at those new investments, but we have to ensure that we can fund them either with equity or with debt financing, while also supporting those businesses who've built up debt during the crisis. And approximately 2/3 of the bounce back loans, as I understand it, are first time debt. So we also have a issue of debt management as well as being able to repay those. So some challenges ahead, there's no doubt about it. And very difficult to know the balance between what Rhydian was saying is where do we put these loans, and how do we support the businesses coming through for economic recovery.
Thank you. You have an extraordinary helicopter view, Charlotte, in relation to the fact that you're CEO of the Trade Association for Fintech Businesses. We've gone through the most extraordinary period in 2020. Could you give us an idea of what the mood is in fintech that you've perceived as at the moment?
Yeah. And very pertinent to the audience today, and also with Rhydian on the line, it's been a tale of two halves. So anyone who's been involved in payments, e-commerce, and businesses are just flying, investments coming in to those businesses, and really driving through some significant change. I've heard asset managers talk about that acceleration of digitization has been advanced by 3 to 5 years. So when we look at that, it feels quite rosy. Businesses have no doubt pivoted. For those who are relying on travel, they've moved more into online payments. But again, reg tech and everything that needs regulatory technology. So I use all the acronyms. But if we look at regulatory technology and everything that allows you to authorize yourself by an online ID, again, those businesses are doing well. For those in SME financing, alternative lending, non-bank lending, there's so many different phrases, but it all means the same. That was an incredibly tough few weeks at the beginning of the crisis. Government loans were put through the original banks that were created through the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme, came out of the 2008 crisis. And any non-bank lender that wanted to distribute CBILS loans and then subsequently bounce back loans had to become accredited. That was a team that were 2 or 3 people on a normal day at British Business Bank, and quickly expanded to 25. And all credit to them for getting those businesses accredited as quickly as they could. But suddenly we found businesses weren't distributing normal loans, they were suddenly distributing government-backed loans. When it came to banks-backed loans, that interest rate set at 2.5%. Let's face it, that was the right thing to do to help the businesses to borrow at the right amount. But obviously that shut down the door for most non-bank lenders who just weren't able to secure wholesale funding. They don't get access to term funding at the Bank of England. So those businesses have pivoted, they continue to pivot. We're very much looking forward to seeing what the Chancellor does on the loan succession programme. We've certainly been very active in the non-bank lending space for the last few months, and really hope that as we start to build out that new programme, that we have a really healthy SME financing environment. That doesn't mean banks versus non-banks. That means a holistic approach across banks and non-banks and regulators and government to ensure that we do have the financing in place for economic recovery. So, as I said, that will just show you where we are. Smaller fintech firms obviously had to go and secure funding, trying to do that by Zoom. Everyone knows about the challenges of getting VC investment into their business. It is not easy on a normal day. It was incredibly hard during Zoom meetings. We are now starting to see that dry powder being invested simply because there are some amazing success stories out there. And not every fintech company was going to survive, just like not every business around the country was going to survive. But that seems to be unlocking now. So what was a concern 3 months ago is a little less of a concern now, but still a few challenges ahead as well.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Charlotte. Rhydian, Charlotte mentioned in just one of her answers here, the early stage investment, et cetera, into fintech businesses. Given that you've gone through the whole cycle now in the fintech business, when you were starting RateSetters, was the early stage financing available to you then?
Yes, I'd say early stage funding and seed funding's pretty good. There's the EIS scheme, which really was it's a very generous scheme to investors, and grassroots helps a lot. I think that's been in a way commoditized by crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding is one of the great innovations of the last 10 years, and I think we're going to hear much more of that. And there was there is VC money, and actually a lot of it's American, and I think that a lot of Europeans money is beginning to kind of copy that model. But so I'd say the answer is yes, there was money.
And is the situation the same? Is it better now or worse? I mean, is it still available for your contemporary, a contemporary now trying to do the same sort of thing that you did? Would it be available?
Yes. Well, I think that, fintech, there's lots of areas where there isn't necessarily the same kind of virgin territory that there was. But I think where there perhaps it hasn't followed right the way through in the UK is sort of IPO. And I think you're seeing all these announcements now. You're beginning to see that people realize that there's good early stage funding, there's good VC funding. That's got to move through to IPO quickly, like it does in other countries. Because, it's understandable that people like dividends and so forth, but also, I think that's where the gap is actually into IPO. And then as for whether in today's environment, I think there probably is. As Charlotte said, I think in March, April, and May it evaporated, but it came back in June, July, and August.
Yeah.
And maybe if I can come back on that IPO point, it's a piece of work we were doing over the summer as we looked at the recapitalisation project the City UK was running. I was involved in on how to recap bad loans. We also then had to look at the growth capital gap. We know we've got a problem with growth capital in this country. It's always been estimated around 7.5 billion. That was estimated to double during the crisis as we saw that drying up of that growth capital. And obviously that means we weren't able to potentially get investment into some of those growth sectors, which was incredibly important. Spent a fair amount of time on that, some really powerful data. Really positive that we're now seeing FCA and Bank of England have announced they're convening a working group on productive finance, as they would call growth and patient capital. A lot of focus over how we can get growth into our pension schemes through potential tech IPOs or investments into private companies. But as Rhydian says, that drive to take a company to full growth, full scaling ability, and then onto the LSE's public markets to get that growth upside from technology is incredibly important. And I'm pleased to say that I've been very involved in that piece of work, looking at where the gap is. We can't compete with the SPACs. that are being launched in the US every single day, it seems. 40% of funding has been in the US markets has come through SPAC listings. And I noticed that we are seeing some of our best exciting tech companies using the avenue. And that's certainly something that we are engaged on to ensure that we keep the most exciting technologies, give them the capital to grow, to perhaps stay private if they want to stay private, or otherwise access public markets at an earlier stage. And that's where this potential listing rules review announced, that will be chaired by Jonathan Hill, is really, really key at this particular time.
That's interesting. Charlotte, talk about growth of fintech businesses. One of the prerequisites for growth is, of course, attracting the right talent. And we've got a whole series of changes in relation to the immigration rules, etc. From talking with your members, has there been are your members concerned about the issue of attracting talent? Is there a big shortage there, or is this sort of rather overdone?
There's a significant shortage. There's a global race for talent, and unfortunately, everybody wants the same talent. They want data scientists, they want engineers, they want digital skills. We haven't really been as good in this country of bringing those skill sets through schools, colleges, universities, and into the workplace. And we have to fill that gap, but that's not going to happen overnight. 42% of the fintech sector comes from overseas employees that come into the UK. And personally, I would love to see us keep that internationalization. I don't think this is about saying it's just about having British people working in companies headquartered in the UK. We have to continue to keep our borders to bring those people in, and quite a significant opportunity for us if you look at what's happening in the US market on talent as well. We'll see what happens if there's a presidential change there. But I think we have to ensure that we can bring the right people in. That's not just technical skills, that's scaling skills as well. And 28% of the sector comes from EU. So also we have to ensure that we look at that as our talent pool and open up the borders accordingly. That doesn't mean that for everything. I do agree that we need to ensure we are using the best of our talent here and making sure jobs are going to those people who want them, but also ensuring that if companies are growing fast and they are putting really great jobs into here, and then if effectively they have to turn them away and put them somewhere else because they can't bring them into the UK, then obviously that's tax that we're going to miss out on. So I think it's finding that balance between really supporting some of these most exciting technologies with the right talent to help them grow.
Yeah, no, thank you, Charlotte. Rhydian, has lack of talent, available talent, has that constrained any of RateSetter's objectives?
Well, we have an offshore development center in Western Ukraine, which in Lviv, which is quite a center actually, and that has meant that some of what you hear a lot of is people struggling to get developers and engineering talent, because it's just the hottest demand you can imagine. It's very noticeable that across the whole business, those people, they always have other options. So that's why we had a development center, is to be able to scale up effectively without being completely hostage in a way to the hot London market for tech talent. And that's the way that and that was something that was quite attractive, I think, in the acquisition, was that what we built there. So that's the way we've done it. And I echo everything that Charlotte says about making sure that it's still perceived as an open place to come and work. But we've done it that way.
Really, what would be interesting, I think, for members watching is that coming from a chairman of a bank that I read last week, and saying we have to remember that we are just merely in the foothills of the sort of technological sort of takeover of banking and finance, and that in sort of 10, 20 years time, the whole sector will be unrecognizable. Rhydian, is that your view as well, that we are just doing the baby steps now and really things are going to motor extraordinarily from now on?
Yes, I think that this has obviously accelerated it by 5 or 10 years, I guess. Digitalization, it's changed consumer behavior, changed small business behavior, and people feel that they've had to deal with things online, and so they're not going to go back because it works. So that's obviously, and everyone can see that. Who chooses to be the providers of that? I don't think one should just assume there's going to be great disruption there. I mean, the people with the largest tech budgets are the incumbent banks. So but there's definitely going to be some breakthrough fintechs if there aren't already. So I think, yeah, the digitalization of financial services is just it's plain for everyone to see. One thing I would say though is that that's not necessarily a different product. It's just delivered digitally. I mean, I'd say the only real change in product really is potentially, you know, crypto, which maybe really is quite a change. You're actually dealing with a different store of wealth or different currency, but otherwise it's just going to be the same financial products delivered digitally.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. And I'd like to move on, Charlotte, in one area, and that is again your position to having this helicopter view of the sector. There's a traditional sort of perhaps stereotype view that it's a very male-oriented world, the sort of tech world, etc. Is that changing? And you know, are there steps that have been taken in order to make it more attractive to more sort of diverse participants?
I mean, certainly the willingness is there, and you know, I'd love to say we're making a dramatic change. About 29% of the fintech sector is female. Ethnic minority is pretty shockingly low statistics. I think unfortunately when it comes to investment, we're not following through that trend. So 17% of founders and CEOs are female, but about 3% of fintech investment goes to female founders, and you know, and with black founders it's even worse than that. So we have to change that, and that's changing through all areas. That's changing at entry level, scaling level, but also investors as well. And when we look at investment teams, it's just under I think it's 48% of VCs have no women on their investment teams at all. So the way we can change that is obviously looking at who's investing in them, the founders coming through, ensuring we're demystifying it, to make sure we get rid of conscious bias or unconscious bias. And unfortunately, when we look at, you know, words have been analysed of using in pitch days, and unfortunately female founders get asked different questions to male founders. There's an amazing statistic on that. So there's still a lot of work to be done. The fintech sector itself wants to change, but a lot of it was born out of financial services. And if it wasn't born out of financial services, it was born out of technology, and obviously neither of which are known to be the most diverse sectors as well. I think, you know, I'm delighted to say that every founder and CEO I talk to across fintech is really focused on this particular area. They recognize they may have started a business with 3 and 4 people of their friends that may have been male dominated, but the change is coming. We need to have more role models. There's not enough out there, of course, but the mentoring, the changing, the focus on culture within these firms, so they're starting with the right concepts, I think will ensure that as we bring the next wave of talent through, we're going to see it looking very, very diverse. And there's still time to change. This isn't the large financial services. We've got millions of jobs created already. You know, a small percentage doesn't, you know, a small number doesn't have to, you know, it can make quite a difference quite quickly. So lots of work to be done, but where firms are talking about their work-life balance, they're talking about their culture, the way they do things, they're strategizing, those are all things that will make it a more encompassing sector. We just have to be careful, obviously, on the back of COVID, and everybody is seeing these statistics coming through, that as people move to working from home more, and, you know, wrap around childcare, which comes up all the time, you know, some of those jobs going, unfortunately, are the women. So some real focus that needs to be made over the next few weeks and months to ensure we don't go backwards before we go forwards again.
No, thank you, Charlotte. It's a very interesting comment. Charlotte, you just mentioned role models, etc. Are there some specific sort of highlights that you've seen? Are there examples out there that you point to as to sort of how people from diverse backgrounds have succeeded?
I mean, it's all types, and, you know, it comes back to even, you know, as I said, even the backgrounds to the fintech sector. Most fintech founders I know actually aren't English. They come from different, you know, they might have come here to go to university and grown their business out of it. They may have, you know, arrived into the UK because they see the government and regulatory environment for fintech is so positive, and we are constantly attracting that West Coast talent as well. So in all, it's a very diverse bunch of people, and that's a really great place to start, with an ultra focus on culture and working environments and driving change. And I think, that attracts a really great diverse, pipeline of talent as well. When we just launched something called Fintech for Schools, which launched last week. So we put an app in that's educating young people on financial inclusion, financial wellness, careers in fintech. And of course, when you look at the school kids, everybody's downloading that app. It doesn't matter where they've come from, what their background is, male, female, ethnic minorities. So if we do the work within schools to inspire our next generation, we should be able to make that change positively in the next 3-4 years. The great thing is founders are often very young. They don't have to have 25 years of experience. They just have to have a great idea and move it forward.
Yeah, no, thank you, Charlotte. Rhydian, I said we'd come back to the Metro Bank deal that you did. You've done something that very few people who sort of found a business have managed to do, which is to go right the way through to an exit to a big corporate. Could you just sort of say a little bit about that, insofar as you're able to talk about it, and also just sort of perhaps a couple of ideas as to those people who do go through that. What sort of advice would you give them if they're embarking on that situation?
Yeah, well, the strategic rationale for it was that Metro Bank have a strong deposit franchise through their stores and online, and they wanted to grow in an area of lending where we are strong, consumer finance. And I think for them it was a buy versus build decision, and they saw an opportunity to buy into our ability to originate, underwrite and manage credit. And so the strategy was really clear from the word go. And I think all transactions, particularly in the height of COVID, are pretty stressful. And but what pulled us through the whole time was just this sense that this does make sense. There is actually a reason why putting these two businesses, Metro Bank funding into RateSetter was going to allow RateSetter to grow enormously. And so that was. And as for advice, I mean, I go back to the point. I think it is incredibly bruising, and one needs to just keep an eye on what the end goal is, because I think sometimes it can be so bruising that by the end of the deal, actually both parties have kind of beaten each other up so much that they don't on day one they don't get about to grow the business. No. And one's got to remember the end goal is a good one, and then dust oneself down and say, right, now we're working together, because the final stages are about negotiation. Let's be honest. And that can be bruising. Yeah. But we kept an eye on the end goal, and that pulled us through all those sort of final stages. And that's what I'd really pull out of this experience. And it's going really well. And I think, as you say, it completes a long journey in some ways, an exit like this. But it's actually not in some ways an exit, because this is about growing the lending.
No, well done for getting through it all. Must have been quite a process. Charles, just before we move towards the Q&A session, we've heard a fair bit from the City of London Corporation about fintech bridges, etc., with Australia and with Singapore, etc. Could you perhaps just spend a moment just explaining what those are, and also whether they've been a success, and if you could also just go on to say, are there plans to do any more?
I mean, it's amazing, whether you think they're a success or not, it's amazing how many countries want a fintech bridge. I probably get approached from lots of fintech bridges around the world every single week, from cities that I don't always recognize the name of. So the concept behind the fintech bridge was to have partnerships, industry to industry, regulator to regulator, government to government, and now with a common purpose in mind. That was to help companies land in a country and get through authorization if needed, and for companies to come the other way as well. So the concept's great, and certainly when we get better every time we do one. When we signed the Australia one, I remember Department for International Trade coming to me and saying, what else can we do? And I said, there's not enough in here. We need to have something more tangible. I want to build that partnership there. Otherwise, it just becomes nothing better than an MOU. And we got much better at it. As a result, that relationship with Australia is probably the best out of all the bridges. The relationship with Singapore is very, very strong, even though Singapore quite like to compete and try to take our fintechs away. But actually, in terms of reciprocal sharing of firms who want to come across the bridge, it works really well. There's no doubt more work to be done on them to make them truly successful. I think we are going to have to recognise there are other countries, perhaps those that we are in FTA, free trade agreement discussions with. There's some opportunities there as well. And there's other countries such as the US, which makes a potential fintech bridge quite challenging, because we haven't just got one regulator to go and face off to the US, who've got one in every state. But we do have something called the Financial Innovation Partnership instead. But certainly the collaboration globally in fintech is quite considerable. I always like to think of it as it's slightly out of date now, but it used to look like the British Airways flight map. We may not get you there in one, but we can certainly get you there in two. And having that opportunity to collaborate across border and to help fintechs, investors, fintech hubs, banks discover what else is going on across those bridges is incredibly valuable. And I think you're going to set us in good stead for the next phase of fintech evolution.
Rhydian, sorry. Yes.
No, I was just saying, because we set up a business, and the RateSetter set up in Australia, and that business is now a listed business in Australia, and it's called Plenty now. But the UK was seen as laying out the blueprint for a lot of this fintech regulation, and it meant that they gained 2 years by teaming up with a UK fintech to give comfort to their regulator. And not total comfort, because they have to do their own, but it accelerated them by 2 years. So that's a good case study of UK moving the way.
Interesting what you say, Rhydian, and tease up the last question before I go to Q&A, which is a question to you both, perhaps Rhydian first, then Charlotte. And that is, when I'm doing my sort of pitches to talk about how important the City of London is and all the rest of it, then I'm often talking about the importance of fintech and how much of a lead the United Kingdom has when it comes to fintech. I just wonder, you both talked about how much competition there is around the world, etc. How vulnerable is our crown, or do we have the crown still in relation to the global centre for fintech, and also B, is that crown vulnerable? Rhydian first.
I definitely think that one did have a right to say that one did have the crown, and I think that I'm interested to hear what you say, Charlotte. I think the consensus is that one, clearly one can't be complacent at all, because I think where the UK was very good is giving regulatory and government cover to this and actually being supportive, and that gave a halo to UK fintech, and it's amazing what effect that can have. But that runs out of road in terms of the next stage is scaling and investment, and that's probably where, I don't know what you're going to say, Charlotte, that from your helicopter view, that the UK needs to make sure it stays up in terms of that late stage scaling and investment.
It does. I mean, we're certainly at the end of what I call phase one of fintech. Models have been proven, innovation is incredible, incubation of new ideas, and new ideas constantly being born, even through the crisis as well. So the model's proven. But what we have to do is show we can scale. We have 8 unicorns, so companies valued over $1 billion. Obviously, as I always say, valuation is only really when you actually exit at that valuation is when you can really test it out. But we also have to be able to help our companies scale as well. I think the UK has done an incredible job in supporting and incubating the fintech sector. As Rhydian says, government, regulator, industry, all of us have been pointing in the same direction for quite some time. And you only have to talk to US VCs, and they come scouting for fintech ideas in the UK because they know there's a better chance of them getting to this level of scaling than probably any other market. But what we don't want is to find that they just get bought out by private equity and then floated elsewhere, or jobs and IP moved as well. So that's the focus we have. That's certainly the discussions we have frequently with government, is making sure that we are being ambitious. We've had today the digital sandbox has been announced. So the first cohort's coming through on that, which again, another innovation between the corporation and the regulator. The GFIN announcement from the FCA, which is about a global regulatory sandbox. Again, that was born out of here. And you only have to look at the Bank of England every single week and their speeches, which talk about digital finance and what's going to happen on crypto and stablecoins. So I think we are pushing forward. There's a lot of different voices at the table. So sometimes it doesn't seem perhaps the most joined up, but there are others who are perhaps a little better joined up and throwing everything at this. Macron regularly invites our fintechs over to the Elysee Palace to come and talk about moving to France. hasn't really had much traction yet, but we have to be careful that during this crisis, and as we look at the post-Brexit world, that we have to go over and above what needs to be done. And this isn't just fintech, this is all parts of tech as well. It's green, it's ESG, it's medtech, edtech, and we are in a great position of strength, but we cannot take our foot off the gas in any shape or form, because others will look at us, they'll copy us, and there is always a risk they catch up. So for now, I'm very bullish. I think we're in a great place, but it will need some significant investment of time and resources to ensure we just constantly stay ahead and don't let those others catch up.
Lovely, thank you, Charlotte. I'm going to move on to the Q&A now, and so we've had a fair few questions coming in, which is good. I'm going to start off with an emailed question to me from Mike. What steps have been taken in order to solve this talent problem that Charlotte talked about? Is the government making it easier to get visas, these types of things, and are there any further steps that could be taken?
It could be made a lot quicker, that's for sure. As I said, I always find it quite frustrating when I talk to the really fast scaling fintechs who are trying to hire 50 to 100 people, who then just say, oh, we're going to put them outside the UK. I think on the flip side, we have to leverage our talent around the UK as well. If we look at what's coming out of the universities, everyone has fintech campuses now. And before, everyone used to think, oh, those jobs have to be in London. I think COVID has proved that it doesn't have to be in London at all. And we're seeing fintechs invest. Greensill put an investment into University of Manchester. So we're getting smarter at that. Strathclyde is putting in data scientists, by the thousands there. So yes, let's absolutely use that talent we have that's coming through our university from wherever it is across the UK. And let's make sure, as I said, we make our immigration system more efficient for those who actually genuinely want to put great paid jobs into the UK and not put them overseas.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, there's a maxim on interviewing, and that is never ask a question that you don't really know the answer to. But I'm going to break that maxim because I've got a question here from Xenia, who's asking, could the panel give their views on the upcoming EU taxonomy regulation and what impact it might have on ESG? I'm sorry to say I did not know that there was an EU taxonomy regulation. And does that mean anything to Charlotte or to Rhydian?
The specifics of it don't mean anything to me, but so I'm not going to waste.
I mean, let me just talk a bit, take maybe the helicopter view on sustainable finance and the opportunities, again, for the UK in sustainable finance and climate change. Every time I see a new fintech turn up, looking at a new product, a new service, I get very excited. When I look at the art of the possible of how does our blueprint in fintech come into ESG, into climate, and suddenly find green tech, ESG tech, then that's when I get even more excited. Because there's a purpose of fintech. It was created to bring more choice and transparency, but it must have a purpose, in my view. It has to help people who weren't being helped before. We now have this opportunity to look at what we've done across the fintech space, again, with government regulators and industry pointing in the same direction, and then bring that into the ESG agenda. And I think that's when it's going to be really exciting. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've done it in one sector. Now let's bring it into this new sectors as well.
Lovely. Good. I've got a question from Gary. The UK is the undisputed world capital of fintech. What can other regulated sectors, e.g. medtech, learn from fintech about creating a world-class cluster? Perhaps, Charlotte, that's a good question for you.
I mean, medtech's a really interesting one because, when I talk about using the blueprint, there's a few more challenges around medtech and life sciences because we haven't really achieved the growth capital piece in there more than ever. So I think that is something we have to focus on as well. I mean, just an incredibly exciting sector. You look at what's coming out of Oxford or coming out of Cambridge. And, when I look at how many unicorns there are across the broader tech sector, this is one where we are no doubt going to see the opportunity there. But a lot of them do go to the US, and a lot of US companies do come over here and look at what's coming out of those great universities and take the IP. There's some good companies now starting that actually protect the IP by putting that into a different company so we don't lose the IP around it. And I think that's quite important. But there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be able to apply this same rule that we have to help a company to incubate, innovate, scale and grow, and try to find ways of keeping those great innovations here with the IP and the jobs that follow as well. incredible opportunity there, and I think COVID has just proven the opportunity for medtech more than ever.
Lovely, thank you. A question for Rhydian, and it's again from Gary. Gary's asking, he's mentioning the fact that the Scottish National Investment Bank today launched with an investment in a company called M Squared, a Glasgow-based company which are world leaders in quantum innovation and optical technologies. I think the question is, what's the panelist's views on the opportunity for the bank, and is this something that could be repeated around the UK? So this idea of the Scottish Investment Bank, etc., does that make a sense for us to be doing something similar down south?
Yeah, I think that sounds a very good idea. I don't know the I didn't quite get what exactly that they're looking to invest in. Sorry, what's the?
Well, I mean, I think it was an example of the fact that it's invested into a Glasgow-based company which that are doing quantum innovation and optical technologies. But I just sort of sense that it's the idea of it does a sort of almost the corporatization of a nationalized bank. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, I was going to say about the medtech. I mean, I think government support and government words are as powerful as government money, and because investors will fill the gap with money, but what they need to think is that there's a support, regulatory support for industries. So I think that would be my view, that it actually what they need to do is articulate recognize what the future is, put in enabling legislation as early as possible, don't stand in the way of it, don't allow people to kind of stymie it and so forth. The capital will come, the capital will follow. So I mean, that would be my overall comment, that it's the halo effect of support as opposed to the money.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Charlotte, if I could ask you a question from Medwin. How do you see the move to remote working impacting on the hiring trends in fintechs? Earlier today, he spoke to a friend in Canada, interviewing for multiple roles outside Canada, including London, as an example of the trend.
I mean, it's back to my point of across the UK as well. I think there is this opportunity to say, do these jobs need to be in an office? We've seen several fintechs saying they will not be going back to an office at all. So whether that's going to be long term, let's see. But I think there is that opportunity to think really smartly about hiring patterns, and does everybody need to be into a London office or Edinburgh office or Manchester office? Probably not. A lot of the fintechs already use remote workers. It's not well publicized because you don't really see them in statistics, because you only see statistics when they set up an office. If you go and talk to one of the fintechs like Monzo, there are people all over the country working from home, and had that before crisis as well. So definitely an opportunity to leverage remote working and the best talent around the world. And I think we will make some significant changes there. This is a sector that was ready to go to home working almost instantaneously, and has survived quite well. There's advantages of offices, obviously, but a lot of global firms have people spread all over the world anyway. So yes, I think the fintechs are quite smart on that. They have been hiring and seeing this as an opportunity to hire really great talent from wherever it is in the world, and to bring that in quickly before others catch up.
No, understood. No, thank you. Reading a question from Kirsty, and I think she's remembering the fact that Britain has had a lead in so many industries and then has lost that lead over time. What does the UK fintech sector need to do to help deliver a truly global British fintech?
I think it's ambition and the willingness to actually export and to go through the treacherous waters that is going and trying making a success of it in other countries, and navigating all the different jurisdictions and regulations. And I mean, that's the only way to build truly scale businesses is making them global businesses, and because the home market's not big enough. It's just, and we haven't come on to the B word, but Brexit. But I mean, and I'm not suggesting we talk about that now. But I mean, but that is the dilemma for UK businesses. And do you go early when you're not profitable in your backyard, where you make yourself very vulnerable, or do you build a strong position in the UK, profitable business, which probably takes 10, 15 years, and then off that strong foundations, you can go and take off other markets. But that's the only way, is to take on the export challenge.
Yeah, Great. A couple more questions we'll squeeze in. No, thank you, Rhydian. A question for Charlotte from Ranveer in Mumbai. Ranveer is mentioning the fact there are a lot of fintech businesses in India. Are there any plans for a fintech bridge with India?
Back to another fintech bridge. So I'd be signing quite a few, and one of those would definitely be India if it was in my choice. I love the innovation happening in India, and I spent a lot of time in India in my previous life, so I'm probably more disposed to doing that. And I like the innovation coming from TechFin. For those who don't know, the value of Aadhaar, where they brought in that digital ID that allowed people to suddenly get access to finance, is quite incredible. And I think, I remember during Chogam, I was moderating a panel with one of the Indian leaders, and I said, I feel slightly embarrassed that I'm telling them what to do for fintech with our population of 66 million, and they just given a digital ID to 1.2 billion people, in an instant, and who should be teaching who. I think the north-south, east-west collaboration is absolutely key, and how we can learn from the power of technology, the power of a smartphone that we've seen in India, we've seen with M-Pesa in Africa as well, is where it really gets exciting. And I think we have got to be driving forward some of those partnership opportunities, whether that's a fintech bridge, a partnership, a collaboration, a sharing of ideas, but there is no doubt some significant opportunities in emerging markets, and that's definitely one of the top of my list.
I think the opportunity that's bigger because there isn't that incumbency.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to squeeze one last question in. Question from Nashwa. He's saying that we missed the deadline for the digital sandbox for this cycle. Will there be another cycle in spring? I presume that's for Charlotte.
I'll defer that back to the corporation. I'm sure there will be. No, I'm really excited by the digital sandbox. So keep an eye on. We'll find out an answer to that one. But certainly that is an opportunity. Looking at those COVID responses, leveraging that sandbox, using all of our experience in the regulatory sandbox is incredibly important. I don't know what cohort one, the reg sandbox 6 or 7. So I'm sure if you send a letter in of support, I'm hoping we'll definitely see more.
Lovely. Well, look, you heard it here first. Fantastic. Well, look, Rhydian and Charlotte, thank you very much indeed for being such sort of excellent guests, and thank you for making it such a fascinating conversation tonight. I'm very grateful to you, and so thank you very much indeed. I'm grateful to you both. Good night now. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Alistair.
Good. Well, I think that was a remarkable sort of conversation with Charlotte and with Rhydian. So thank you very much indeed for joining. In the last few minutes, I just thought I'd mention the fact that we do have some excellent guests coming up for future events. We've got a big international trade event tomorrow in relation to Portugal. And we've got events including Sir Lloyd Dorfman, who I'm interviewing on the 14th of December, plus also Christmas drinks on the 17th of December. So look forward to seeing you there. We do have some excellent sort of big events coming up, which is on the next slide. One of which is the interview with the Lord Mayor, Alderman William Russell, at 6 p.m. on Monday the 7th of December. So looking forward to seeing you there. And the Portuguese matter tomorrow, that's 11:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Looking forward to seeing you there as well. And this should be, there's a great opportunity to invest through Portugal into the EU and the upcoming opportunities there. So don't miss that one. Just to round off, we've got the most extraordinary deal here, which is 20% discount to your IoD membership. I would thoroughly recommend it. You get the most extraordinary help and support as you run your businesses. I think the legal and the tax helpline alone, given that the number of hours that you get of legal and tax advice, that manages to sort of pay for the membership just by itself. Then on top of that, you get all the professional development, the courses and the training, and also the ability to influence policy. Plus, you get some extraordinary events, as hopefully as you've just heard. I do hope that you've enjoyed yourself this evening. I very much enjoyed having you on this conversation. I thought the both guests were extraordinarily good, and I'm grateful to them for participating today. I'd like to thank the IoD team David Stringlamar, plus Jeremy Duncan, plus also Sophia Mooney and Manuela Pelticova for their kind attention and support during the course of this evening. And most of all, I'd like to thank you for watching this evening. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next event. All best to you all. Bye-bye now.